Kim says, well, or she says, I'm sorry, the marketing. Well, our CoStar rep thinks we should buy a quadruple diamond plus. Google wants us to break down some keywords, and Facebook told me to bump our budget to $6,000. And Cameron says we can't afford any of that. And then marketing director says, should I just call Larry, the sign spinning acrobat on Spirit Boulevard? So we don't know how many of you guys are still using the signage, but not to say that there's not some ROI in there, but we've gotten a kick out of some of those anecdotes from some of our clients that still have operators, sometimes property managers, regionals, whatnot, that push for a lot of outdoor signage. So,
well, that, and then obviously how each of her vendors is telling her to spend all the money with me.
Yeah, that never happens. We'll never recommend increasing your budget.
All right. Well, now we're going to move into our next session of the day. So this is, I was just in a room with Marty, so I know Marty's here. I don't know if Chris made it yet, but these are two folks from DialogTech, which is a pretty advanced call analytics provider out in the space. Some of you guys know we do our call tracking now through DialogTech, but we would have had them on regardless if we do work with them, because they just we really think that they're advancing the space, and we think that they'll do a great job talking to you guys about what is possible with call analytics today, both with someone like them, but also with other call tracking technology. So it's not all them. In fact, Marty doesn't know this, but I got a call from CallRail yesterday. Their product development team had a few demos basically to run by me, but that's not to freak you out, Marty. I'm just saying there's lots of vendors in the space. Everyone's doing a lot of really great stuff with call analytics. And so Marty and Chris are going to talk to you guys about what can happen today and what the future is going to look like when it comes to call tracking.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the honesty too about our competitors. I'd love to talk with you offline about what you learned.
Yeah.
And by the way, today is not a commercial for DialogTech, and what our approach here. We want to just make this a discussion in a forum to discuss really the importance of third-party call tracking. So it probably is as much a commercial for all call tracking, in general, more agnostically speaking, versus just a discussion about what DialogTech does for Digible and Digible's customers. But obviously we have our bias. One thing I was just thinking, being on these Zoom meetings, and we've done, a handful of these types of sessions. We stopped, I don't know about you guys, we've stopped doing, we basically pulled our direct mail budget in COVID, just because people aren't in the office in large part and don't see the point in, sending out direct mail or, gifts or anything like that. But when I'm in this meeting, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great product placement if everybody had a DialogTech mug and they just happened to be drinking it during the session? So, whether it's DialogTech or your brand, I guess that's a thought, like, hey, in this post-COVID world where people are on Zoom meetings all the time drinking out of a mug, it might be a good product placement for you. So anyway, just give me some thought to that. The purpose of today's discussion, I'm here and I've got my colleague, our Chief Product Officer, Chris Henger, with me as well. The two of us are going to be discussing how you can acquire more renters with a data-driven marketing strategy for inbound calls. As I said, DialogTech, if you go to the next slide, Chris, thank you. As I said, we're actually, DialogTech is a provider of AI-driven call tracking and analytics platform for both marketers like yourself, property managers, and agencies. And there we go. This is the slide, Chris. Thank you. And we're actually, we work with some of the leading brands that use DialogTech to both, attribute, to route their calls, to analyze those calls, both inbound phone calls for better business results. And as I mentioned, I think I may have mentioned, and that was in the last session, the breakout session, we work with some of the largest, probably 4 of the 6 largest apartment listing brands in the space, including Digible and Digible's customers. So, some of the perspective we have is in large part formed by your industry, and we're going to go into some of the benchmarks that we've uncovered this year in the apartment listing space. So going to the next slide on this one, Chris. What we've seen in this space, and this is from 2014 to 2019, DialogTech actually has been in the call tracking and analytics space since 2008, but we have, we have some benchmarks since 2014. It was interesting to me that, in a mobile first world, the drastic increase in the reliance that we have on these little computers in our pockets, right? We've seen a 215% increase in U.S. mobile advertising spend since 2014, 110% increase in total calls from mobile advertising, and we're now seeing 162 billion consumer calls from mobile advertising last year alone. What this means is that our calls to business convert 30% faster, and they have a tendency to spend 28% more than non-callers. So what this means for us, and especially in call-dependent spaces like apartment listings, is those callers have an opportunity to generate more conversions, more revenue for us, and optimizing that experience is critical for us as apartment listings property managers. If you go on to the next one, what we've seen, this is a benchmark, and again, this is for all DialogTech customers in the apartment rental space, is that post-COVID lockdown, since February, we've seen a 75% increase in calls for apartment listings across the board. So I know in an earlier slide, David shared some benchmarks specifically to Digible customers. This is actually for, obviously Digible is in this benchmark, but it's all of our apartment listings have seen a 75% increase. Now, we did see just a small decline initially, but since, basically since April, we've seen a significantly greater increase. And that accounts too for seasonality. So in a normal seasonality, wouldn't see a 75% increase in calls from the spring to the summer. And if you go to the next one, so calls are valuable leads, but one of the things we say is many don't result in conversion. So you guys know this obviously firsthand. Not every single caller is looking to rent an apartment this week, right? Not all calls are sales leads. Not all calls are equal. 85% of those calls, aren't sales leads. So we may be wasting marketing budget driving the wrong types of calls. We also know that over half of all sales calls to apartment rental properties don't convert, right? They don't set an appointment. That's what we mean by conversion. And then we know 30% of all calls to properties are unanswered, right? So the leads might be, we might be sending the calls to apartment listings. Property managers are busy doing other things. They're showing apartments. They're not answering calls. If the person doesn't pick up, they're likely to go to another, call another listing. So interesting insights, and the call analytics are helping us get greater, help us understand what are these things. B, it's helping us then go make optimizations to drive the right types of callers, more sales, convert more sales leads, and convert those at a higher rate. If you go to the next one, Chris, common marketing challenges around inbound calls is, how do we measure the ROI? So I think one of the things we're helping, Digible customers is, how do they measure the return on their ad spend? And then it's this notion of the high spend versus high value. Are we pulling the plug on campaigns that generate expensive phone leads, but also might be very profitable for our business, for conversions? Next, we have callers that aren't converting, spending a lot of budget and generating a large number of phone leads, but they're low quality. They're not converting at a high rate. What's the problem with the lead quality? Is there a caller experience issue? Do we have a problem with converting those? And then just around remarketing, am I putting callers into the right audiences for remarketing? This is a big thing, that having, kind of that understanding of not just what's driving calls, but what's happening on those calls allows, Digible and, property managers to make, more informed decisions around their marketing budget. Next is, what we'll go into is call this actually, this is where, Chris, I think you're going to take over.
Sure. So good morning, all. My name's Chris Henger, Chief Product Officer here at DialogTech. I just want to thank David and the whole Digible team for inviting us. I think this is these types of sessions where you can interact with your customers is really valuable, and to have like 30 of them all at once. Wow, pretty good thing. Marty just shared that there are some favorable drivers for growth in these inbound phone call businesses, businesses that are call dependent. And if you're getting a lot of phone calls, you need technology and you need data to drive your business. And so this is the market space we're in. Is Marty signaled, there are several different, players in the space. There's us, there's Marchex, CallRail, Call Tracking Metrics, Invoca. Broadly, I would say we all have capabilities to do call tracking. We have capabilities to do conversational intelligence. There's certainly differentiations within those platforms. There's definitely different differentiation in terms of target market, who's the ICP you really want to deliver for. So, as a marketer or an agency, you have choices out there. We certainly respect our competition, and we want to win fairly and drive business for our marketers. The goal in this session here is this data-driven strategy for calls. Marty said that call tracking's been around for 12 plus years, and we're going to walk you through the importance of tracking the calls, understanding the intent of the calls, and then trying to figure out what's the value of the calls. Marty's going to come back and talk about some of the optimization strategies, and then I'll come back and talk more about how do you handle calls, because that last mile, if you will, often can trip up people. So let's start with how does call tracking really happen? Third-party call tracking happen. So on behalf of our marketers, we have over 2 million phone numbers. We ask our marketers to put a first-party cookie on their website, so we are able to track both the phone call and the web activity. So each visitor sees a different toll-free number or a local number. If they're coming in from Google and they're going to Brookdale, which is a senior living facility that has a series of locations, and visitor number 2 is coming in from Facebook at the same time, they're going to see the exact same page, the same pictures, the same address. But as you see how we've boxed the phone numbers, both local and toll-free, are different numbers. And that's the basic premise. When they call, the call is tracked to a caller, and then that marketing interaction that drove the call is captured. So that's kind of the mystery of call tracking. The next phase in terms of the offerings that we can provide to you and to marketers is a deeper understanding of the conversation. We all as consumers have been on a phone call and heard the whisper that this call is being recorded for training and quality purposes. That's the same thing that we're doing with our marketers and when their consumers are calling their businesses. So let me just give you a little bit of an example of how we break down a call. So phone conversation starts, "Hello, how can I help you?" We answered the call. Very important, critical step. "I'm interested in looking at your Lakeshore units." Definitely a lead, somebody expressing interest to understand more about that particular facility. "How much is the rent?" So we've discussed rent. There's actually price discussion happening. "I need to move in by the end of the month." There's real high urgency. And then last, there's a schedule. "Let me schedule an appointment for tomorrow." So now we've actually captured an appointment. So if you really look at this as a real example, we would really score this up at about a 9 out of a 10. We capture these lower level signals. There's urgency, there's price already being discussed. There's actually a conversion event to, "Hey, I've just booked an appointment on Friday at 1 o'clock. And that is going to drive this kind of lead score of 9 out of 10. So this is one of the core things that helps us understand, are we delivering good calls, sales opportunities, things that have converted. So when we then move to, we've captured in the call tracking aspect, where did that call come from? Did it come from Google? Were we able to capture the keyword? What pages did you land on? What page did you call from? We just walked through kind of how we do the AI capability here, but our goal is to take this call data and then this conversation data, and we're pushing them into our marketers' MarTech stacks. So there's kind of 4 core MarTech stacks that we push data into. So we have media platforms like Google Ads, like Microsoft Advertising, like Facebook. Analytics platforms, Google Analytics being by far the biggest. Adobe, another good example. Then we have the bid management platforms, Search Ads 360, Marin, Kensho. Those are our primary bid management platforms that we're integrated with. And then last is CRM systems with Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, and HubSpot. And the goal here for us is to make this data actionable. And how do we make it actionable? Well, we want to understand what were the keywords that drove these calls? Were they good calls? And then are you, the marketer or the agency on their behalf, doing bid optimization and other tactics? And then
Chris, I think great. Yeah, sorry, I think that's a great point. Like even the basic call tracking providers, for the most part, can drive the data into another system, right? Like a Kensho or an AdWords or something. But I would just say, like, sorry to interrupt your flow, Chris, but that would be something that in the call probably don't have insight into, but something they should definitely be asking their vendors is like, hey, you track these calls, that's great. What do you do with it, right? Do you port all the way through into your bid system? Does this help you change your bidding on ad groups or keywords or what have you?
Yeah, it's a really good point. The amount of details and choices, I guess. So one of the biggest challenges, call types, right? Is it an extension or is it a website-driven call? And then what data were we able to capture to be able to push it into what type of platform? And I know the Digible team knows how we were pushing data into Google Analytics and then trying to move it from analytics to ads, and it was less reliable than we wanted, and that became an important integration. So we now have a direct integration into Google Ads, which is delivering us a much better solution for our customers. You know, the other piece of any platform, any MarTech platform, is reporting. We and all the others have reporting solutions. I think the piece that we do well is this overlay of the conversation. You know, you have the volume of calls and when did they call, who did they call, where did they call? But then we've done a nice job of overlaying the conversational insights on top of that. So now that you know, hey, this was a really important call and we didn't close them. So what could we do? Or we did close somebody because we have a conversion event. And maybe if we wanted to do lookalikes and suppression, we would suppress somebody who's just committed to a conversion event, like I've scheduled an appointment to go to see the dentist or an apartment. But ultimately, reporting, I think, goes back to our buyer. So our buyer is the VP of marketing, the director of digital media. They need to get credit for all this activation. So that's probably the most important aspect of our reporting platform, to be able to help them understand their ROAS or cost per leads. And so, Marty, I'll bring this back to you to kind of take us through the optimization of driving inbound phone calls.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so as Chris alluded to, and we get down to the optimization piece of how do we optimize on calls? I think one of the things you guys are all contending with, right, is calls come from various channels and not all channels are created equal. What the analytics allow you to do is to compare kind of the efficacy of these various channels, whether it's PPC, organic, call extensions, GMB, et cetera. And the most advanced marketers are making optimizations based on what they're seeing from what's driving, not just what's driving the most calls, but what's driving, kind of the best calls, what's the lead score from those various channels. So one of the things, obviously, that's become, a bigger thing, more recently we've seen with apartment listings are, GMB, call extensions, obviously, in the last couple of years have really taken off. And by measuring these different performance, you may see that call extensions, as we say here, we may see call extensions drive more good calls than Google ads. And if that's the case, we can use our bid adjustment to show, we can consider using bid adjustments to show call extensions and more often for the best keywords. That's one of the ways that we would do some optimizations. We also might see that our call extensions are driving the wrong types of calls, current renters versus, non-sales calls, et cetera. We may consider eliminating them from our keywords driving callers so you don't want to pay for, right? So these are some ways that you as a marketer can be informed by, not just what drives calls, but what drives the quality of calls, what's the lead score on those, and where can I make optimizations, from one channel versus the other.
Sorry, Marty, two things. We'll have like 15 minutes before we'll have to go to like Q&A and breakouts, so just keep you guys on track there. But secondly, I wanted to highlight the point that you mentioned about optimizing towards where the call's coming from, like call extensions, right, versus to the website. And so for those folks on the call that are using someone like DialogTech, this just kind of happens, right? So if you're on like DialogTech or Invoker or Marchex, this is just built as part of the system. But if you're using a vendor that uses something like CallRail, you need to ask your vendor to set this up manually. So your vendor would have to produce a separate call tracking number for the Google extension versus what they use for the website. And most vendors won't do that by default because it costs them money to rent an extra number. But I would just encourage you, for those, a lot of you guys have CallRail vendors right now, but just ask them if they can use a different call tracking number specifically for the extension versus the website. And then that will give the data similar to what Tanya was just asking in the chat. She'd like to know how many calls she's getting directly from the ads. Sorry,
that's a good call out, David. And then one of the other things on call extensions is, we recently made an update in our platform. I think we're the only ones in the industry who do this. I said I wasn't going to make a commercial for DialogTech, but this is something that's unique to what we were able to do on call extensions, where we're able to get to the keyword level and help, for call extensions specifically, help you see the keyword that drove that call. So that is a difference, a differentiator actually in what, I know David and the team at Digible is leveraging from DialogTech. And that's just a more recent enhancement that we were able to make for David. So going on to the next one, activating call data and bid management tools, it just drives the right audience based on their conversations. So, putting callers who didn't convert into, I think actually going back, helping our callers activate call data and a bid management tool that drives better results. So, we're working with all of the largest bid management platforms, and we've got an example here from one of our customers is GE Appliances. So, we were able to help them increase phone leads by 41%. And decrease their cost per lead by half, simply by highlighting, the better callers, using DialogTech for the keyword attribution to drive for callers from paid search and call extensions and site visits. So that was an integration that GE Appliances did specifically with Search Ad 360. Okay, next one is, putting callers into the right audiences based on their conversions. Just, those who didn't convert, putting callers who didn't convert into retargeting campaigns. This is a very common practice. So, many people are optimizing bid management simply around converters, those who, converted. Whereas what we really want to do is retarget and have our campaigns targeting those that are high leads. And that's what this is about. Using our best callers to find more valuable lookalikes and audiences. So, identifying those that are high lead scores and targeting audiences that look like that. And then lastly, suppressing callers from seeing ads that aren't relevant to them. I think a slide I showed earlier showed that, up to 85% of all of our callers are not sales leads. They're not people looking to rent an apartment. They may be existing renters, they may be vendors, they may be any number of things, right? Those should be suppressed from future ads so we can increase our number of sales leads that we're looking at. Yeah, you know the next one. So this is just about how we improve our Google ads through our smart bidding, so our results from call value data. So not just passing, not just the volume of calls, but the data on lead quality and conversions. This helps Google smart bidding optimize for what drives the best leads. I think this is something, in the chat, I saw something about like, hey, a proxy for a good call in the absence of actually having these call and conversation intelligence and the KPIs around it that we can uncover from our AI. But a good proxy, a starting point anyway, could just be the duration of a call. So many people use that. Obviously, that would be better would be using the actual, the transcriptions and the analytics around that to really understand, was this a sales lead? Was it a conversion? And can I optimize around that? So bad calls are separated out from actual sales related calls. So Google doesn't count non-sales calls as conversions to optimize. And then they'll also take into account each call's lead score. So the value on that call you see here on the left-hand side that either converted to optimize for what drives the most valuable phone calls. So a lot of what our customers will do is optimize only around lead scores of a certain value in Google. We go on to the next one. Lastly, I know this also came up in, I think it was actually on the breakout session that I was just in, but what tools are we using? What's your source of truth? Some of you have a CRM like a Salesforce, others are maybe looking at or getting that. But one of the key things that we see some of our customers asking for is getting to the revenue match back for calls that helps marketers really increase their return on their ad spend. We've got an example here, Greg Smith Equipment. They provide basically workshop equipment for automotive industry. And we're helping them connect DialogTech call tracking data to revenue from their CRM to attribute the revenue of calls from each keyword. What this lets them do is it helps them pass back revenue per call keyword data into Google Ads, Microsoft Advertising, and Smart Bidding. It helped them increase their return on their ad spend by almost a third and increase revenue overall by almost over a third, simply by getting this revenue match back, optimizing around that in terms of their bid management strategy.
All righty. Thank you, Marty. So the last data-driven strategy, how do we detect and correct mishandled calls that definitely are hurting conversions? For a long time, many years, there's been this classic finger pointing. So if you're a business that has multi-locations, franchisees, and then also utilizes call centers, there's this tendency, hey, I'm corporate and I'm driving leads to the locations, and the locations are saying, hey, I can't convert these leads, they're crappy leads. Conversely, the corporate marketer's like, no, I now have proof. These are good leads. You don't know how to close, right? So that finger pointing's been happening for quite some time. Now you don't have to take the word of that anymore. There's real data that helps us make these decisions and how we optimize handling these calls. Now, you guys are experts too. You're experts at optimizing in your space. So this is get your hands dirty kind of stuff to really follow a process to drive these outcomes. So there's really 4 core things that have to happen. First of all, we have to know, are we driving quality leads and where are we sending them? Where's the most volume? Are we distributing them across locations? Do we distribute certain other calls to call centers? We got to understand the quality of your leads and where they're going. Probably the most important metric of all is, are we answering the phones? I saw in your guys, when we were in the breakout room early on, I saw you guys going through some of your metrics, and missed calls was something you're tracking, which is great, because that is the most important metric. We're going nowhere for our marketers if they're not answering the phone. We also have to figure out what are conversion rates and what are the reasons why certain things might not be converting. It could be, a poor agent not being able to handle that, but there's others, details there. So let's go and think about different ways to try to interrogate where problems lie. These are a couple simple reports that we provide, basically a heat map on when the calls come in, and then when are they being missed. So if we're trying to solve for unanswered calls and we don't know why this business is not answering the calls, well, the first thing we need to do is got to figure out when the calls are coming in. We need to figure out when the calls are going unanswered, and then we have to know, is this paid or organic? So if it's paid and the location is closed, we can stop running the paid ads. If organic calls are happening a lot during these closed times, how do we route them to call centers or open locations? And then in terms of if the missed calls are happening when you're open, that's troubling. Either you've got a staffing problem in terms of the hours of day of week that get most of the volume. So that's one key area to look at. The other big question is there a receptionist in that location? If you're a physical therapist and you're shadowing somebody because you're new, are you also responsible for the phone calls? So those are key aspects to really try and pinpoint why calls are not being answered. And then the other piece that is critical, to understand the value of these calls is really diagnosing what's happening on these conversations. It is a marketing channel and a opportunity unlike no other. There is the idea that your brand and your customer and that engagement, that moment of truth, is happening 24/7, and now you're able to record and transcript that and create transcriptions to then turn into structured data to then ingest into AI and machine learning models. You have tremendous insights. You can now look at these call recordings and transcriptions. You can see if there's scripts. You can see if there's promotions that they're not pushing. Are they asking for appointments during the call? Are they able to handle the common questions that are coming up? If not, you've got coaching opportunities and a need to prove that you can improve that performance and increase your conversion rates. What are the questions that are being asked most? We have some AI capability that's able to isolate the questions, the common questions across a particular marketer that are being asked all the time. And then how do you utilize that? How do you write FAQs? How do you create content marketing? Maybe there's even a halo effect that if you try to address answering all those calls, all those questions, in terms of written form, you may be able to drive some SEO because they're asking a lot of questions about this. So those are a couple techniques to try to figure out how to use the conversation along with the optimization of answering the call. Here's a case study across a large auto repair and tires business, 1,200 locations. They were missing 30% of their calls. They had early hours, they had late hours. They didn't have a receptionist. The mechanic was in the middle of changing the oil at the same time having to get a phone call. And there were really two things that we did. A lot of the things that we just laid out on those heat maps were critical, but I would say one of the most important things was it got C-level attention. It became a very big priority. Answer the phone. And I think those are probably some messages, in the seats that you guys sit in. How can you get to the C-suite of your customers to make sure they understand the importance of that, and role play on how could we get a part-time receptionist? Should we stand up a call center to catch these things that aren't being answered? A lot of different choices. We actually have taken, this produced savings of $6 million, recaptured revenue of $6 million a month. We've actually driven it down even more. So it is possible, and the numbers are big, particularly around missed or unanswered calls. So Marty, back to you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about, and I know we've got only a few minutes, and we're going to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'll try to get through this pretty quickly, but Comfort Keepers is a longtime customer of DialogTech. They work with over 650 franchise locations across the country. In-home senior care is what they focus on. They need data on what drives each type of call to the franchise to drive the best results for their business. So they use DialogTech to analyze those calls. If you go to the next slide, Chris, yeah. So one of the things that we've helped them help Comfort Keepers is the using DialogTech's DNI for call tracking to see exactly how their channels, their ads, their keywords, call extensions, website, all that stuff is driving calls to the franchise and to their call center. So they probably not too unlike many of you. They're relying on a location to pick up the phone, or in some cases they have a centralized contact center. And all of the things here on the left-hand side are the things that DialogTech is helping capture, from a call attribution, the channel that drove it, the campaign, the ad, keyword, web page, all of that stuff is informed. We capture the GCLID, caller profile, all that then gets pushed into Google Analytics and their bid management Search Ad 360. By doing this, by passing the keyword level, the call tracking data into Search Ad 360, enabled them to make better optimizations. They were able to increase in year one over 41%, increase the number of calls over 41% in year one, 59% in year two, while reducing their cost per lead by half. So, Chris, if you want to go to the next one real quick.
Yep.
So just the value data from AI used to drive additional ROI and gains with these. What Chris alluded to before, if we layer in, the thing I talked about right there was the first column, but if you layer in the second column here, this is our AI-driven conversation intelligence to help segment based on intent and outcomes. So I use the term KPIs. When we think about KPIs, what we're doing is we're using our AI, our analytics, to analyze all of the transcriptions from those calls to determine, one, was it a sales lead? Was it a conversion? Was it a job applicant? Was it an existing caregiver, or was it another? And by bucketing in all of the calls into these KPIs, they're able to create audiences and call intent outcome from keywords activated in Google Ads, as well as and improve the bidding and the results from this. So that's over a 50% increase in sales conversions from all calls year over year, and a 14% increase in conversions from job applicant calls year over year by informing this entire strategy with the KPIs. So if you look at this slide really quick, it's a kind of a good, better, best, right? Many of our customers start with the attribution piece first. What can I learn from just getting attribution from all channels? And then the better would be to take the second column on here and really inform it with the KPIs from what's happening on those calls, and then to route those calls appropriately. In Comfort Keepers' case, they're actually routing calls based on the scores that they're coming up with on the caller intent, where the caller is coming from, and the performance of locations, to make a decision of whether to route that call directly to a location or to a contact center. And so having the ability to route calls, we call this intelligent routing based on that information, helps them drive these conversion levels up, by over 50% year over year. So if you go to the next one, Chris, I know we want to leave a little bit of time to talk about what we think is next in the industry.
Sure. And I will be brief. I think this push to unlock the first party data and capture voice of customer is the gold, right? This is what our marketers really are trying to get after, and not only solve it for the call channel, but we believe that it holistically can inform a lot of marketing strategy across the enterprise. There is no other set of data that couldn't be more valuable than these conversations back and forth with your brand and your customer. I do think one of the most important parts of that is data sharing between the marketer and the vendor, so that we can identify if this was a new caller. Well, I can send that to the marketer, and they can confirm, is it truly a new customer or just a new caller? They know them in the email channel, some things like that. Revenue matchback is growing in importance. If we know there's price sensitivity on phone calls, their email and their direct mail promotional marketing, if you're highly if you're highly price sensitive and you're always asking, is there a deal, is there a coupon, we can bucket those callers, and you can then in turn not send direct mail and coupons out to via emails. So I think there's a ton of insights there. This whole sales operations, CX automation, customer expectations have never been higher. I believe over time that eventually the CMO kind of wins out inside of these larger organizations as they think about the call center evolving from a cost center, something that they've spent tons and tons of effort to optimize from a manpower standpoint, and they've almost forgotten the value of all these calls. And these calls maybe are a little lower funnel, maybe they're customer satisfaction insights, maybe they're things that indicate loyalty or lack of loyalty. So I do think going forward, calls are not going to be viewed as cost as much as they are already today. I mean, we had a client at one point made a comment. Somebody made it. We were talking about our AI, and you can define a good call, and this woman said, "There's no such thing as a good call." Right. So there's that mentality out there right now, particularly in the call centers, less so in the locations. And then prescriptive analytics. We're going to all continue investing in AI and machine learning. I think this is all about voice of customer again, but it's maybe more the personalization of it for the business that's about to get on the phone with somebody and having insights on them pre-call, smart routing that we can do to make sure we handle these calls. I think there's a lot of optimization that still could be done on the inbound call side of the house as compared to call centers. So I think there's a lot of room, in our use cases in particular. And if I had to kind of close, guys, and we believe that the call channel unlocks this voice of customer in ways that we could never have thought about. And I think the smart marketers will be the listeners and likely the winners if they really invest into understanding what's been happening in these conversations. So that's kind of our forward-looking thinking right now. And
I love how you're saying bringing it all together, right? Because you mentioned like customer experience here, but some of the things you can do is like what page of the website did someone call from? So not just did someone call from my call extension ad, or did they call from my website, but then you can get down to what page of the website did someone call or not call from, right? So you could start to determine what customer issues there may be with the website templates you have. And then to your point, like what the future looks like, if you start to bring those conversations in, I really love your like total customer angle that you're talking about, where it's like, well, do you send them a direct mail piece, or do you email them, or do you take them out of the sequence? So I could imagine someone entering your website through BetterBot, but then like later they call you, right? So they're already in your CRM, but now they call you, let's match that back, and then let's treat them different as opposed to two separate leads, because it's easy for those two to get mixed up where you accidentally start hitting them with two different sequences, like they're two different people. So yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, I think businesses that have been managing just say CRM, right? And that's how they're spending a lot in digital media, they're doing direct mail, everybody's got email. But I think what's happened in the last 5 years is digital media is driving demand gen activities to drive phone calls. And we're all walking around with phones in our pocket. And that's really what is, and I would say that the call channel kind of lived outside of the holistic approach that you just kind of were talking about. What do we want to do in email and in CRM touch points and direct mail touch points? How does the call channel fit? And we're still kind of working our way in there right now. Nobody's really figured out how to optimize that life cycle right now.
Well, we're going to have Reed hit you with some questions. If anybody else has questions, we have about 7 minutes, so just drop your question in the chat. But I know I've spoken with you guys a lot more than Reed has, so let's let him come at it with a fresh perspective and see if he can stump you two.
All right, we'll go to a bigger picture.
Well, I was wondering what the moonshot was for you guys, as we often refer to it here at Digible. Like, there's 2 or 3 things that we know are going to be, and maybe that's what you were just ending there, Chris, with, and what the hardest problem is to solve from DialogTech's perspective, and the, I guess, realistic chances of that happening in the next few years. So I'll stop there. I have a few others, but I just didn't know if there was anything else that was like just something that really excites you guys, but has been also extremely difficult that you think you potentially could be closing the gap on here in the next 3 years.
Marty, I'll go first if you want. I believe we have to move from calls and touch points and answered calls to really what all marketers care about. Am I driving new customers? Am I retaining and growing them? And then am I starting to see signals of churn, and how do you mitigate that churn? So calls has its own, lexicon and its approaches, and direct mail's been doing lead generation forever, right? And email is a very mature channel, if you will, that lives around how do I nurture my CRM through that. I think right now calls have lived outside of that flow, and to me, I think it's not sexy, it's just real. It's what drives money, it drives retention, right? And so how do we all have an omni-channel approach?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that a little bit. I think in the industry, what we see, advanced marketers are embracing this. Advanced marketers, some of the examples that I shared with you today are already embracing this. What I envision in a few years' time, and I've seen this happen in the other digital channels as well and other marketing channels, is that you're gonna see much wider adoption by SMBs. So small apartment listings will care as much about that AI-driven intelligence on a call and integrating that into their rev match back and their CRM and their bid optimization as much as the large listings. And that's something that to date, I should say, we only see some of these more advanced, kind of capabilities driven by the more sophisticated marketers. What we're trying to do, in this space, and what we think that where the space is going to go is you're going to see a lot more of the smaller mom and pop shops, if you will, smaller listings or apartment listings. They're going to be using this technology 5 years from now.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned a few times when it was where the call is coming from, that was really the source or the platform. It wasn't actually the geography. And this is something I brought up speaking openly as we talk about the competition that stumped, as David's, I guess, saying, call reel, which was, when will we see lat long on the reporting. Is that something that because of PII or other reasons like we will never see? But I remember running some email campaigns years ago, and one of the more dynamic visuals that we brought back to the client was exactly where all those emails had been opened. And so they were able to reverse engineer then some of their geo-targeting based on those reports. And it just seemed natural to me that if you're getting all this incredible data on call analytics and a lot of it is happening on their phones, why not serve back a heat map and say this is exactly where those calls actually occur, that you could be smarter about how you approach your geo-targeting. So what are your thoughts on that?
So,
Yeah, I
so
mean,
Marty,
Yeah, I was gonna say, Chris, yes, I agree with what you're saying, and I think but I think there are certain limitations in the market around. We talk about geo. At one time, we were able to capture specifically where the cell was coming from. We were able to share that back with you, the marketer. Now, industry no longer allows that, industry standards, right? So we can no longer get that data back from the carrier, from the cell carrier, for instance. We have other ways of doing geo-targeting though, and Chris already talked about some of the other ways in which we can get proxies for geo. But one of the things I think you alluded to, can AI drive some of that? Can IP address be a proxy for that? Not 100% accurate, but that is another way to get to it. So I hear what you're saying. I think it is something we have customers today that are getting proxies for that in other ways than the way we used to do it in the industry. And if you have anything else to share on that, Chris.
the only thing is just because it's really recent. I have a former colleague from way back who's pretty senior at Foursquare, and we've talked back and forth about a year ago, and just wasn't a priority for neither of us at the time. But let me flip it back to you, Rick or Reed. If we were able to connect a call to a physical visit to a location via a partnership with Foursquare, would that be of interest?
Yeah, I mean, not to speak for our clients, but I think it'd be of great interest. One of the biggest challenges right now, especially with COVID, is what is going to be the movement that will happen, as far as where folks are living now in relationship to where they work. And as they are going through their shopping, has that changed much from, pre-COVID to now? I think we all assume that a lot more calls, and we showed that on some of those slides, are happening, and we assume are happening at home. But I think that there's a ton of value in having more insight to geographically, mapping those things out. So any way that we could get at it, I think our clients would greatly appreciate it. I have one last question. I know we got to get to this mastermind groups, but hopefully we can make this somewhat quick. Are you guys marching towards forecasting calls? You mentioned prescriptive analytics. I didn't know to take that, that includes quite a bit of predictive analytics, but where you're actually not only helping set expectations, because that's always a big thing. It's like, hey, I got 100 calls last month, and then I got 20, the next month. Like, what happened? And then what should I expect, next month? Like, can you guys help with that? Because we're constantly having to manage and set expectations with operators and owners. So I'm curious if that's part of the equation or an opportunity. And then the other part of that is actually informing media mixes. So if somebody is saying, hey, I noticed that I got 100 calls, but only 20 of them were quality because of the call analytics, and I'd really like to see more quality or just more volume, then how would that affect my media mix and potentially my budget? And it's part of the thing, it's one of the biggest things we're trying to solve for at Digible with our own technology and platform. Just didn't know if you guys see yourself kind of stopping short of that as far as DialogTech helping inform budget, meaning you guys are actually making some of those recommendations instead of leaving it to the marketers to analyze and make those decisions.
Yeah, I think, just partially because of time, but I think that would be a really interesting kind of do a whiteboard session or a virtual whiteboard session together. I would love to try and probe further on that with a couple other smart ones in our firm to join us.
I mean, I think on that point though, Reed, it certainly is. I think it's possible, right? When we look at the things that, so when I showed a graph that showed all of the channels and the lead scores on those channels, what's driving more, the number of calls from each channel and the lead score for each channel of the calls on those, you can extrapolate from there. Well, great. We need to optimize around call extensions, for instance. What is that going to do around our forecast? We haven't connected that dot yet to give you we haven't given you the framework, you as the marketer, the framework to say, oh, this is going to drive X number of more calls. But I think the point you bring up is a very valid one. And I know as our customers, our marketers make optimizations in one channel versus the next, it can have a consequence of driving a lot more calls that they didn't expect or didn't account for. They didn't have their contact center, even equipped to handle, et cetera. I know we saw that just recently with a customer that, launched a big local listing campaign. So yeah, those are some good points. I think those are things we can certainly help with. We've got the kind of the foundation or the tools to help to drive that, but helping connect those dots into more of a forward-looking forecast, I can see where that's helpful.
Cool. Well, appreciate it, guys.
Sure.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thanks for the time. Nice to meet you all.
yeah, thanks, Chris, Marty. If we get more questions, we'll definitely fire them to you guys afterwards and get some answers for some people. But it looks like I already had a couple takeaways to send to people from the chat. So thanks again. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for having us.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
And so for this next session, we're going to have just a very, very quick break, less than 5 minutes for bathroom for anybody. I know that puts us a few minutes behind Carrie and